because spend wasn't even an issue at that point in time. It was more around just delivering the benefits that we needed to remain competitive. And I think that what I could quickly see, and it's kind of interesting because when you start taking a look at the financials and you start taking a look at the data in the market and you take a look at claims and how claims are moving, you realize that I think I realized years ago that it was absolutely going to be a keen focus going forward.
Welcome to Broken Benefits. I'm your host, Lee Lewis, and this is a podcast where we learn from top employer experts on how to fix our broken benefits to save lives, save dollars, and save your talent. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Broken Benefits. Excited today to introduce our guest, Sheila Savageau. Sheila has been managing health plans for over 20 years. She is one of the foremost benefits managers in the country. She's managed billions of dollars in spend on both a yearly and then cumulatively over time. And she is the architect behind one of the largest and most sophisticated direct contracting arrangements between an employer and a large health system that I've seen anywhere in the country. So excited to learn from her today. Sheila, welcome to Broken Benefits.
Right, Lee, thanks so much. It's nice to be here today.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. So first, would love to hear in your own words a little bit about how you approach benefits and what your experience was that brought you into this space and helped you to think differently about them.
Yeah, so, I take it back and I kind of go back in time a little bit. And my background is in accounting and finance, and I've always kind of been a numbers person. And I remember for the first time going into the world of HR, as we called it back then, and benefits. And to be honest with you, a lot of people, even the CFOs at that time, really were not, they weren't focused on spend because spend wasn't even an issue at that point in time. It was more around just delivering the benefits that we needed to remain competitive. And I think that what I could quickly see, and it's kind of interesting because when you start taking a look at the financials and you start taking a look at the data in the market and you take a look at claims and how claims are moving, you realize that I think I realized years ago that it was absolutely going to be a keen focus going forward. And I think with your benefits landscape, a lot of it has to do with kind of the mission of your company and where you want to be competitive and how you want to be competitive from a total rewards philosophy. And when it comes to benefits, I always say that we want to offer kind of the best of everything that somebody would absolutely need across that spectrum of life. And then how do you balance it? How do you balance it based on employee wants and needs? And how do you balance it based on cost for the company? So I call it the balancing act. I almost look at it as a scale and seeking out data. Data tells the story.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Oh, I heard you got off social media.
Yeah, actually, it was just kind of depressing.
Did you know that 1 in 3 fundraisers on GoFundMe are for medical bills? And many of these people work for companies just like yours. Start giving your employees 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
So I have to ask, one of the most exciting things that you've done is building a direct contract with a major health system, Henry Ford up in Detroit. Both on behalf of a significant health plan, but also working with a significant provider in the system. How in the world did you approach that? I mean, maybe walk us through the story, because most benefits managers are intrigued by the idea of having a direct contract, but almost none of them have any type of training in how they might even start that process, let alone complete it.
Yeah, so I would tell you, and I'll be really honest, I didn't have the training either. We would always take a look at like what CMMI was doing, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, and also looking at just CMS in general, because what I found is whenever they start doing things within that arena, truly it kicks off in the healthcare space. And if you're an employer, you're going to get left behind. And being left behind is not a good thing, because typically it means that our cost only balloons even more if we aren't paying very close attention to what's going on within that space. I always say employers are the biggest payers, but right next to it is CMS. And you have to pay close attention. So I remember at the time really thinking, there were these value-based models, and this was back in 2015. And my team, I'm like, we've got to learn more about them. We've got to see what's going on in the value-based arena. And when we took a look at the value-based models that were being developed and literally kind of where, they wanted to go over time and changing fee for service to value-based, it makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, you want to pay for value. You don't want to pay for simple volume based upon, how many people can you actually run through or how many services can you create only to increase your cost. And
Right.
so the story started in 2015. And I would tell you that we did not do it alone. I'll be honest with you, we didn't know what we were doing. Besides CMS and CMMI, we then went out to market and we did hire a consultant to kind of help us take a look at different markets. And I would also say it was the best time to go. We had contracts expiring with our TPAs. We had, I call it the perfect storm of everything, but in a good way. And we knew that we wanted to kind of disrupt things in different markets to show that, GM was definitely willing to be leading edge. I joined GM in 2013 and GM had, they were still in the confines of bankruptcy. And thankfully in 2014, we came out of that. And GM had always been on the leading edge up until kind of that point in time. So it was really taking a look at the philosophy, taking a look at the strategy of our entire benefits around the globe and creating a philosophy, and value-based became part of it. And we started shifting business. The first thing that we did in 2018, we kind of got our feet wet and we shifted to Aetna with some of their, what they call value-based models, which is very different from a direct to employer contract. And ultimately, it took us a couple of years to, be able to go to the market, thoroughly assess it. And we had what I call all the major systems in Detroit that absolutely were very interested, but unfortunately, the majority were not willing to change. And so that's where we landed with Henry Ford.
Oh, this is great. So you knew you wanted to have some direct arrangements to increase value, but you didn't pick the hospital and then just start the process. You interviewed, so to speak, multiple systems there in town. This may seem totally natural to anybody listening today, but that just occurred to me. It's like, oh, I would have thought you just picked the big one or something. But really, you looked to find a good partner in this and then engaged in a direct contract. You had a consultant to help you write it. And once that happened, how did you insert that into your carrier? I think a lot of people would think that would be tricky because in theory, they're still paying the claims, but they're not doing it with their standard process. Is that right?
That's correct. And Lee, I look back and I remember vividly having conversations with leadership with our carrier. And I mean, sitting at the table, and this was probably in 2016. And I, just explained our strategy, our roadmap, where we wanted to go. And I made it very clear that I would desire them to be a partner, but they were going to have to change in order to be a partner. And I wasn't sure if they would be able to. And I'm delighted to know that absolutely they became a partner and a very quick partner to us. And it's really interesting because basically the way that it's achieved, the TPA does administer the claims that we have. We have different tier structures that are set up, and we actually have different rates that apply to various services that are completely outside of the scope of what they do. And but I would tell you, it was a partnership very early on that by the time we got to 2019 and we, had landed a contract with Henry Ford, I would say those discussions have been ongoing for at least 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
And so I always say that you really need to be very planful and, are your contracts, do they have an opportunity for you to bring direct contracting in? And if not, how are you going to do that? I don't like to surprise anyone, especially my partners. I really like them to be my strategic partner at the table. And I've always said, if you give them the opportunity to change, hopefully they do. And if they don't, you make it really clear that you have others that you're willing to work with.
I love something that you mentioned there, that once you made clear what you wanted out of a partner, effectively aligning the incentives, saying this is what we want. And so any payments we make are with that incentive in mind. They became a partner quickly. I've heard before that the only difference between a good doctor and a bad doctor is good feedback in 6 months. That effectively the system we have today is calibrated precisely around the incentives, and with the hypothesis being, if we can change the incentives, would the system change. And anyway, I love what you shared right there. It almost seems to validate that point that, yeah, once you rearrange that, they can become better partners, different partners very quickly.
Well, I think it's that, and I think also, a lot of people don't really understand the story of like when we went to the Detroit market and we went to the major systems. And even when we looked at our data, and I would tell you very early on, I would have never really suspected that Henry Ford would win the contract. And here's why.
Hmm.
If you're looking at it from a volume-based game, Henry Ford had the least amount of volume for our population. And actually, the one that had the most volume is the one that I thought really would come to the table. And unfortunately, what I discovered, if the health system is not prepared to deliver value-based care, and if the board, it's not part of their mission, then they're never going to change. And so I think that you have to have those two things. And I think that the one thing that I was delighted about with Henry Ford is they had already been at the value-based game for 7 years before they ever came to this contract, not from a direct-to-employer perspective, but definitely supporting Medicare and Medicaid products. And they actually had the data to prove it. And so they had a lot of infrastructure, and they tend to be a very innovative partner. And if you think about it, Henry Ford Health always has been, right, for years and years and years.
Right.
They thrive on innovation. So I think it's two things. I think you've got to have the right innovative partner, and literally it has to be the mission by the board and the CEO of the health system in order to drive change. If those things are not aligned, it will never work.
That's wild. Once you had this partnership and you have this contract, was it fee for service, but with a cap, or was it more of a member-based allotment at a high level? Because, not
Yeah.
necessarily
So
attorneys, but what did the contract look like?
Yeah, so I would tell you it was a little bit of both. From a member base, there were definitely volume. So we basically have a product and a distributive model. So what that means is like if you enroll, you can enroll in the product itself, and you would be considered a product enrolled member. If you're attributed, that means that the year prior, you actually get a certain percentage of your care that's coming from Henry Ford. And if it meets the threshold, if it's 50% or more, now Henry Ford is held accountable to the same quality and cost measures. And even though you're getting your care elsewhere for like the 40 to 45%,
Sure.
they're still held overall accountable. And I think that when you take a look at that, and I would say if Henry Ford were sitting with me today, when you know that you're accountable for that type of care, you've got to make sure that you have what I call the infrastructure within your system and even outside of your system to make things work. And so it's a little bit of all, but I would tell you that it's basically a target PMPM, and it's based on a multitude of different things. We have, 19 quality measures. And we just, wrapped up our 4th year of the agreement. And we literally, within the last couple of months, we have come to terms on the next 5 years. And I would tell you the agreement looks very different today than it did 4 years ago, because I think the more you go into them, the more you know. And you do. You know what's working. You know where you want to push more, even on the health system side of things. And so it's a very different agreement going into the next 5 years, but in a good way.
What are some of the lessons learned from having that direct contract and things that surprised you?
Yeah, so I think if anything, and I'm kind of thinking about the last 4 years, and even as we've gone into like this last year, right? I think one of the biggest things is, you've got to set the right cohort. And when you take a look at the cohort and you're looking at your population, really the cohort should be based upon the region where the care is being delivered and very specific to your population. And I think a lot of people try to go broader than that. And if you start going broader than that, unfortunately, that cohort is not exactly what I call the right comparison that you want to have. And we looked at various cohorts, probably 5 to 7 different ones. And truly the cohort that we'll be matching against going forward, it is a GM specific cohort for the care in which the area that it's delivered. So very specific down to what I call the zip code level, the regional area. And so I think that that is one change that we had this time versus last time. And I would tell you that I would still say that we have opportunity when it comes to the experience. And, and when I say the experience, just the simple things, whether it's outreach and you're closing gaps in care, or whether it's inbound and people are looking for the right care triage. And we've seen that break down a little bit over the years, especially during COVID, because COVID, it was all hands on deck. And, you were taking some of the nurses that were assigned to what I call the service models, and you had to
Mhm.
move them out. So I would say that after COVID, we are definitely in what I call a rephasing, repositioning, and resetting
Mhm.
to get the service where it needs to be. Because, and Henry Ford would tell you this too. They said the great thing about GM didn't just come at this from a cost component, and we did not. I remember what I said vividly, and I kind of had what I call three different elements. And I said, we have to get the experience right. We have to get the quality right, and the cost will come. If you think that you're simply going to go after cost without improving quality or without improving the experience, it's only going to basically measure out for a short duration of time. And then you're going to find yourself in the same boat that you've always been in. And we have
Right.
absolutely run data. We've seen differences, significant differences on the quality side as well as the cost side.
Oh, wow. Improvements in quality and cost, and the quality coming from the 19 measures, probably not all just quality, there's cost in there as well, but of the
Yep.
metrics that you're tracking.
Yeah.
How did your approach and role and philosophy change, and how did theirs change once you had a direct contract? Because most people have not, and
Yeah.
probably
That
won't have had one before.
No, and I think the most beautiful thing, and I've been at this for over 20 years in the benefits space, and I think unfortunately we have trusted the middleman too much. We have literally, as a benefits team, we have said, go carrier and go do your job and just go get us the discounts and don't worry about anything else, right?
Right.
And what we found with the provider systems, the health systems, and the providers in general, they did the same thing. It was contracting definitely with the carrier. And I think for the first time, it was the employer and the health system coming together to truly understand what was important to us without the middleman at the table. And the things that I can tell you that I've learned just over the last 4 years, and this is some of the beauty, I think, that when you really have a great partner who their mission is to improve quality and to lower cost and to get the experience right. But I remember I said, well, I'm going to bring you into the employer community. I want them to know you. I want them to understand, like, what has GM and Henry Ford done. And we did a lot on education. We did road shows. We've been asked to speak publicly together. And really, we call it education because we want people to understand this is not as difficult as you think. And is it valuable? It's absolutely valuable. And then the other thing that Henry Ford did, and I would tell you this was I I had never been involved in anything like this, and it was really eye-opening to me. They had a summit, and it was health systems around the U.S. that were delivering value-based care. And
Hmm.
I came in as the only employer at the table
Hmm.
to talk about the employer perspective. But boy, it was such a day of learning for me. Systems sitting around the table, and when you're in the benefits world, so to speak, you're like, oh, okay, they deliver for so and so. Like you already knew in your mind, but just understanding what they're doing, what are the changes that they've seen, what are the benefits they've seen from it, and where do they need help? Like some of the things that they're not working as well as they thought it should. But I would tell you that was probably one of the most eye-opening meetings that I had.
Wow. What what was most surprising being there?
Yeah.
That's different because many of us in benefits, we have certain assumptions we make about hospitals. I know a lot of those are going to be wrong. What was surprising to you?
Yeah, I think their openness to just tell you what their limitations were or how they
Hmm.
needed an employer's help. So, for example, it could be so I'll give you an example of our contract, and Henry Ford has done a great job, but we really pushed Henry Ford to get there. And this was absolutely one of their key issues as well. When we went out with the original contract, there were geo access requirements that had to be met across every single specialty down to the pediatric level. And in order for Henry Ford to pull that off, we basically gave him less than 2 months to be able to go out and find the quality providers or the quality systems that they could connect with. So I'll give you an example. United Physicians Group, which is one of the largest physicians group in the state of Michigan, they had to actually go and connect with United Physicians Group for them to become part of the Henry Ford GM contract. So we would make sure that they met all of the primary care provisions that we had set forth. and even down to a children's hospital. There's a specific relationship with a children's hospital in
Hmm.
the Detroit area. And so when you talk about infrastructure, people are like, oh my gosh, how does this work? Like, how does Henry Ford communicate with everybody? How do we have the data flowing back? Henry Ford is the one who has the data infrastructure created and set up. But
Okay.
it takes a lot of work in the beginning. I think that people think that you can just set it up and go, and absolutely not. I mean, in the very beginning, we were meeting daily, and then daily went to weekly, and then weekly went to monthly. And
Mm.
now but we do have, there's one person on the team that is definitely dedicated to the day to day with Henry Ford. Henry Ford has the same. It's a direct to employer individual that basically he's the day to day person on it. But yeah, the data infrastructure is no joke. I mean, you've got to make
Mm.
sure if the system doesn't have it, how do you actually help get them there? And and I think that for an employer, because I've talked to my colleagues before that have done direct contracts, and they're like, "Oh, that's an expectation." And I'm like, "Well, how are you tracking that expectation, and how do you really know that expectation's being met?"
And what's
Uh,
the expectation? That there's data
it's the
sharing
data
or?
infrastructure. Like there has to be data sharing always coming back and forth, and not only that, but a governance model built that, let's say that one of the quality measures is not being met across the board. Henry Ford actually has a governance model where they go out and they have meetings with the physicians and the various health systems on a regular cadence so they can review what's going on with the contract. Where do we stand? What are the different things that we really need to improve upon before the quarter ends or before the next quarter ends? So it takes a lot of governance and tremendous data infrastructure by the health system.
You mentioned at the value-based conference that you were surprised at where the providers, where the hospitals said they needed the employer's help. That was surprising to me, just you relating that it was surprising to you, because I would never have thought that. What do they need employers' help with? What can we do to help providers?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. I think one, having the conversations, and that's where it starts, Lee. I don't know why, as employers, we've been so timid to reach out to the health systems, right? I mean, if you're looking at your data and you're spending, 60% with a certain health system, you need to go have a conversation with them and just say, hey, based on the data, this is
Hmm.
what we see. What are you guys seeing? What can be done differently? How can we help you? And they will be very open to tell you how you can help them. And they want to know from you, like, how do things need to be different? And I think even before you ever go down the direct contract road, really sitting down with those health systems and helping them know who you are and what's important to you because they don't. And I would tell you that the thing that Henry Ford talks about all the time, which is really interesting to me, I've never been on what I call the contracting side of the house with the health system and the carrier. But they said, when GM did the RFP and it was like a 150-page RFP, that was a whole different animal to them.
Yeah.
And literally, it took a group of people to be able to communicate, connect, and respond to that RFP. And they're so used to what I call very minimal contracts, and 10 pages or less
Right.
when they're
Right.
contracting, right? And so it's also a different animal in how do you prepare your system to be able to respond. But I
This is
say have the conversation because the other thing that you'll find too, I would say that I didn't start having the conversations until we had gone out with the RFP. And it wasn't me reaching out, it was actually the CEOs of these systems reaching in. And I think
oh,
what they were really concerned about is, oh my gosh, whoever wins this business, like GM is getting ready to move business away from us. Like business could leave us.
right.
And I would tell you, I talked to almost every single one of them, and I was very honest in what they must do. Right. And I kept going back to the provisions of the RFP. I kept going back to, unlimited, like you're taking on unlimited risk. And I would tell you, all of them, with the exception of Henry Ford, were not willing to take on unlimited risk. They wanted $1 million in capitation or $2 million in capitation. And I had to remind them what we pay them every year, which is not even, I
Yeah.
mean, $1
It's
million
more than
is
that.
nothing, right?
Yeah.
So, but I would tell you the conversations are really helpful in the beginning. And the reason that they become helpful is it also gives you insight to the system to see if they're really serious about value-based care or if in their mind they just plan to be a fee-for-service center as long as they can, as long as they can run it out.
How do we make fee for service better?
Mm, gosh, great question. I think that there has to be some policy changes. I do. I think there has to be contractual changes because, Lee, if I just incentivize you, I'm going to pay you a per unit fee and I'm going to let you run volumes through. There's no incentive for you to change that behavior. None,
Right. Just
right?
increase volume. That's my incentive.
It's increased volume. And even down, and this is what I've always said, providers, meaning the docs themselves, they absolutely have good intentions. When they come out of medical school, for the most part, they want to take care of their patients and they want to spend time with their patients. Unfortunately, with fee for service, we have business people on the back end, right? And all they're doing is looking at the revenue and they're going, hey, you can only spend, 7 minutes with this patient today because we need to flow 35 of them through you today. We are not doing any favors to anybody from a patient perspective. If we are just running them through, we're never getting them better. And what we're seeing is just repeat volume coming back in the door. So I even propose, and I know it sounds a little far-fetched, but I think if we were allowing the docs to spend the adequate time that they need with the patient, maybe we wouldn't have some of the waits that we see in primary care. I almost, go back and go, how many of these are repetitive office visits because they never got taken care of the first time?
Oh, we understand that so naturally with call centers. We ask about what is the first call resolution, but I don't think I've ever asked what is the first visit resolution of a provider to correctly and accurately diagnosing what's wrong with the patient and then sticking the landing on the therapy that's needed in the amount of time that was needed in order to resolve that in efficiently.
Well,
Interesting.
if you think about it, right? Like I think about how we hold hospitals accountable for readmissions.
Right?
To me, it's no different, right? If I go in and I become a frequent flyer in your office, there's a reason I'm a frequent flyer. And that usually tells me that you have not solved my issue. And I agree with you when it comes to, and I call it closure and gaps, right? And some of those gaps may be prevention, but are we
Right.
literally looking at all the prevention and not just saying, hey, we need you to go get these things done, but are we ensuring that those things actually got done? Are we hand holding people to ensure that we have closed the loop? And I think that's also been a big breakdown in healthcare as well.
How how do we start to repair and rejuvenate primary care? It's been on the decline for many years. I don't know if that's something that you've looked at or worked to tackle.
Yeah, I think, a lot of employers today are calling it advanced primary care. And I've always, and this has been on my mind for years. And, I've talked about it for a very long time, but it's like I've always envisioned the primary care, the PCP being the quarterback. You have to have a quarterback, right? And the quarterback should literally be surrounded with everything that they need to care for the patient. And whether that's a nutritionist or whether that's a behavioral health therapist or, whether that's access to specialists. And, you may find that your patient, you know, you just put them through the test and they have been diagnosed with some form of cancer. But how do you have access right away? And access to me is not, hey, we're going to go have you see Dr. Smith. That may be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months from now, whatever it becomes, but literally having access to have the discussion, look at the records of the patient, handhold that patient through. And so when I think about primary care, I call it advanced primary care because the primary care physician has to be the QB for the individual's care. Now, it's going to take us changing the way that the setup typically has occurred over the years because this is not normal, right?
Right.
And I also think, when I think about access is a huge issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I hear so many people say, we're going to solve it through virtual care. And I'm like, great. So I'm basically going to put you in front of somebody as a symptom checker because that's
Yeah.
what you are. You're a symptom checker. I don't believe in symptom checker care. I think that you have to have diagnostic care. And I do think with the technology that does exist today, I do think that we have a better opportunity to have virtual care with diagnostics that are much more meaningful. And so when people say virtual first, I'm like, okay, are we talking symptom checker? Or are we talking diagnostic care?
Right.
And I think if you get that element right, I think there's a really big opportunity for virtual care.
I love that. What do you think about trust? I go back and forth on this. I think what is most missing at the doorway of care is the is the trust that we used to have with a physician with whom you had a longstanding relationship. And the proponents of virtual care will say, well, you can still have a trusting relationship. We do it every day at work with our colleagues, et cetera. But I don't know if that's the same as having that in-person visit with, face to face with the Homo sapien amygdala acting up and building that confidence. And we know that trust is medicine. It's cynically called placebo, but it's effectively it's trust and belief.
Yeah.
What do you think about our ability to get there with full virtual, or is a hybrid necessary? I
I
go
think
back
you
and
have
forth
to
on
have a
this.
hybrid, and I do. And here's why. I may know you virtually, but I really don't know you, right?
Mhm.
And if you think about my care, I want someone who's going to listen to me. And unfortunately, on a screen, I don't know if you're really listening to me or not, right? I mean, just true. And it's just, I mean, it's the way it is. Are you really
It
listening,
is,
or are you multitasking? Are you really like
especially if you
distracted?
have the camera turned off. I know you're
Right,
checking email. I know it.
right, right.
That's
And not
right.
even that, but I find that, are you distracted, or am I really your focus? And it's
Mm.
interesting because we've also been looking at like coming into the office, and we have virtual care everywhere, right? And even Henry Ford's been tracking. And I mean, post COVID, people want to be back in the office. I mean, they have all kinds of virtual care appointments open. It's not what they want. And so I
Right.
do think that we have to meet people where they are. So I think there's a great opportunity for hybrid. You establish the relationship. Once the relationship is established, based upon how the patient wants the relationship established, then I think you have a great opportunity for hybrid. Now, because, and I remember hearing this feedback even from our own employees, and it was behavioral health online visits. And I had some go, this is great. This is, so convenient. I had others go, don't do this to me. Like, I want to be in the bricks and mortar because I don't want to have my family members around. I don't want to have to sit in my car doing a virtual appointment. I don't have privacy at work. So I think what we've got to get it down to is what's important for the patient. Because if we're not meeting the patient's needs, we're going to continue to have some of the same brokenness that we've had for a long time.
Yeah. How should I analyze my data, or maybe better said, what metrics should I look for in my data to spot areas of concern?
Mm, I think there's so many today. And I'll just give you a few examples. If I take a look at what we typically do, and these are the things we typically do as employers, we're always looking to see where our big spend is. And I would tell you with almost every employer, number one and number two, and it goes back and forth, it's either oncology or MSK. And when I look at MSK, right, and I think that for far too long, we've been looking at MSK as like my line workers. They have MSK issues. And I'm like, nope, the salaried population who is sitting and standing and not moving all day, they are like those predictive analytics are probably going to come to life, because I call them the hot pot of what's going to happen next. You know, and I call it just the disease of sitting, right? Or the disease of sitting in
Okay.
the wrong place, right? So I
Right.
think you've got to take a look at like what's going on within the environments, and it's the work that's being performed, right? And we always look at things like, oh, that's a production issue. That's not such a production issue. And I think the other thing too that I see, and you kind of go, do I address it or do I not? And it's this increase in juvenile diabetes, right?
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
it's back to a sedentary lifestyle. It's back to, unfortunately, the kids are gaming it, they're on phones, they're not moving, they're not doing a multitude of things. And while we as an employer only have these dependents for a certain period of time, some other employer is going to end up with these dependents for a lifetime as adults. And so really making sure that, do you have the right programs in place that are really making a difference to your population, and not just having them in place, do you have employees actively engaged? And I'm not talking like, hey, they've registered. No, no, no. I'm talking like, are they using it? So whether it's a Vita Health, whether it's a Livongo Health for diabetes, whether it's a Sword Health or a Hinge Health for MSK, do you have the right programs in place? And are you tangibly measuring the differences? Are you seeing, with MSK, you could have COEs, and COEs are great, right? I mean, we want to have the best quality, the best outcomes. We want to make sure if you need that hip and knee replacement. But what I think we have to do before then, we've got to get on the front end of it, Lee, again. Like, how do we make sure they never need a hip replacement? How do we make sure they never need a knee replacement? What about the aching back, right? You go into back surgery, are you marginally better? Typically not. So,
Mm.
how do we make sure that we have all the tools necessary for people before they ever even make that decision about a hip replacement, a knee replacement, or anything else.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Hello.
Hi, I'm here to pick up a prescription,
Okay. Okay, your total is $80.
but I have insurance.
We ran your insurance. That's just your copay.
Can you hold on to that for me? I'll be back later.
58 million American adults can't afford their prescriptions. Many of these people work for companies just like yours. Start giving your employees 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
What advice do you give to new people who are stepping into your role or your type of role?
Yeah. I would say there's two things. One, definitely unity. And what I mean by unity, I'm a big believer in unity. Reach out to people, even if you think they may not be your stakeholder. And don't be afraid to go talk to people. And so if it's a health system, even if it's your local provider, I can't tell you how many times I've had a doctor's appointment. That doctor's appointment to me doesn't turn about like, oh, what's my health look like? It's like, so I'm in there and I'm watching the process flow. I'm watching how they do things. I'm talking to my provider because I want to understand, like, so what do your patient panels look like? What's going on? What kind of systems do you have access to? So you need to like be inquisitive. I think being inquisitive is probably your best bet. And then I would say the second thing is we have to pay attention to all the technology that's going to be available, because I do think there's going to be some enablers to healthcare. And if we think about like artificial intelligence, we've got to think about how that makes the experience a little bit better within the health system. How does it drive? Does it actually lead to better triaging? Does it actually lead to better gaps in closure care and, things of that nature? So I think we've got to keep a close eye just on technology and where it's going as well, and what's the impact to the health system.
It's interesting. Do you see that experience will likely deploy out of employers to their employees through benefits, or out of different health systems to patients, or out of insurance carriers to customers?
I would say the one that I think it will start with, I do think there's the most opportunity within the health system. So I think that it will launch there. I think employers will be almost simultaneously, if not next. And then I'm unsure about the carriers. I think that they are typically pretty slow to respond.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What frustrates you most about leadership in the benefits industry, where they're missing something that they don't realize they're missing, but it's a big opportunity that they ought to move on?
Yeah, I think, and I always say, where have you been? And you can kind of understand it. Typically, when you're in a benefits role, whether you're a VP, director, doesn't matter what, but that lead benefits role, you are very constrained from a resource perspective, and you are being asked to do it all, and you are, and unfortunately, you can't do it all. And I find that we don't pay attention to the big things because we're still trying to keep things in compliance, and we're trying to keep, leadership happy with the different things that they want. And I would tell you, I think what they need to, as a benefits leader, you got to step back and you got to go, what are my biggest three things that I need to focus on? And you've got to focus on them. Like, when people ask me all the time, oh, this direct employer, it's just too hard. I've heard it's so hard. And I keep going, I kind of like, I look at them puzzled and they think that I had a huge team. I didn't. Basically, I had one full-time analyst as we were launching and myself. And it wasn't even me full time. It was a portion, very tiny portion of time.
Wow.
And so I would tell you, and so when people say they can't do it, I either think one, there's fear, and it's called fear of the unknown. And I think there's a lot of that goes on. Or they go, but wait a minute, I can't get a consultant. They won't let me do that. I would tell you that there's employers like myself and others. We are happy to show you how to do it. So again, I think focus on the big three and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to step out and do something bold.
Oh, I love that. What do we need to change to start fixing the employee experience?
Oh, wow. What a great question. So as an employer, and we'll start there first, and then we'll go into the health system. I would tell you, and I'm sure you know this all too well, Lee, because you deal with employers all the time. We have so many offerings that we're like, how do we even navigate this through for people? I can tell you what I would love to have. I would love for like a tool, a technology to know everything about Lee. And basically they serve you up like, Lee, this is what you need and this is why you need it. And it knows you so well that it knows if you have a kid with juvenile diabetes and boom, the next thing you have is everything to help you navigate that world. That's my hope and vision for the future. Now, how we get there, it's going to be more complicated and a little bit slower, I think, than I would like.
Yeah.
And I always said that even when we landed the direct contract with Henry Ford, I said the experience starts with the employer well before they ever get into the system. And what I mean by that, we are the ones that touch our employees. We communicate with them, we engage them, we market them, and we have to have that experience so crisp before they ever enter a health system. So when we landed like the direct employer contract with Henry Ford, we talked a lot about like what are the marketing materials, how are we going to approach it, what does it look like, and we did a multitude of different things through different channels. And I'll never forget, I said to Henry Ford had written a letter and they were going to send it. And I looked at it and I said, no, I'm going to bring GM's marketing people to the table and our communication people, because unfortunately, health systems, they write in medical lingo. They don't write in what I call marketing lingo. And the most beautiful gift, though, I would tell you that the Henry Ford team learned from the GM team. And the best people you can ever have is your marketing people sitting at the table that know how to market to a consumer. So I think you've got to market a little bit differently. And you've got to make sure that they're there at the table. Back to that trusted relationship, we brought, and we still do, like during annual enrollment, whether it's virtual meetings, whether it's on-site meetings, we bring Henry Ford and even some of their physicians to the table to answer any questions that employees will have. And if they don't want to answer or ask publicly, we have a way for them to do it privately. And so that's how you start building trust. And then I think out in the community, being a big supporter of what happens out in the community. But I think if you've had a family member who, you feel may have died at the hands of a physician, it is very difficult to rebuild a relationship at that point in time. Is it possible? It is. But you've got to go out there and you've got to really show them who you are as a human, not just as a physician.
Makes sense. Do you feel like employers are sufficiently empowered to be able to make changes to the system outside their own employee base?
I do. And here's why I say that. It's really interesting. Like if I take a look at what we did, and at the time I was very dismissive of it. I'm like, oh, it's not the first one that's ever been done. And I don't think I truly understood that it was the first one in the state of Michigan. It took off like wildfire. And here's why I say that you can go outside of your realm and you can make a difference. I look back at just 4 years ago and the different forums. And one of my commitments, I always say there's two things about me. One, I'm a humanitarian, and I am. Truly, I care about people. And I think the second thing, I want to educate everybody on what can be done. And I don't want to just look at the four walls that I live in, but I want to go out and make a difference in the world. And I think when you start making a difference in the world, whether it's your voice at public forums, whether it's your voice with a different, what I call health system groups, whether it's your voice at maybe a business roundtable that you're sitting at, there are definitely ways to advocate. It can be at the policy level. It can be outside. So sometimes I think that we get too insular and focused on our own company and, hey, I know I've got responsibility for this. And we think that we're just one person, but I always say it starts with one person. And then what you find is you'll have this grassroots effort that's just phenomenal. And when you get out there and you start talking, you will be shocked at the friends that you actually end up absorbing. And people that don't work in the same field as you. I literally look at the people that I've met just in the last 5 years. Never did I ever dream that I would meet some of the people, whether it's the venture capital people, whether it's, people that are physicians, but I call them business physicians because they were surgeons, but they understand the business very, very well.
Right.
Or whether it's just the business people on the back end, right? And so it's phenomenal who you come into contact with, and all of you will have the same passion, and it's to improve the health of people and to literally get our country to a better place where we can get sustainable when it comes to healthcare costs.
I love that. What was something that you believed when you got into these roles? And there might have been many things, but that you believed to be true, and then you later learned you were way off and had to correct your perspective.
Wow. I'm actually going to take a different spin here.
Okay.
I always say follow the dollar.
Okay.
Okay. And what I mean by follow the dollar, in my opinion, one of the probably most egregious areas that we really need to focus on is the pharmacy industry. And I think it's starting to shift a little bit, but probably not to the degree I'd like to see it shift. And so if you follow the dollar in every single thing that's going on in healthcare, you'll probably be disappointed, but then you'll probably have an appetite for how do you get on board to change it. And so my whole philosophy is follow the dollar. You're going to see a lot of greed where that dollar ends up coming from and how it flows through. And then you may be surprised that you're the one funding different things that you never knew you were funding.
That would definitely lead to the disappointed feeling.
Yeah.
Once you had your contract in place, what changes did you see in utilization? You mentioned that at the beginning, they were receiving the minority of your patients. They were not a huge percentage. But was there a real shift? And if so, directionally, what happened?
So I would say in the very first year, we hit what I call on the enrollment. We'll talk about the product side because the attribution side is very large. On the product side, the first year, and we hit exactly what we thought we would. We ended up with about an 11% enrollment. And then after that, what we noticed every year of the contract, it usually goes up 2 to 3%. And there's different ways that you do that. Sometimes your attributed members, the thing that I find really funny about an attributed member, they're getting the majority of their care from that system, but they're not a product enrolled member. And you sit back and you go, why?
Why? Yeah.
Why? Right? Because if you
Just
really
switch
want to
over.
go, right. And if you really want to go tier 2, you can go tier 2. And even if you look at the cost differential, depending on your utilization, it's actually more beneficial for you to enroll in the product. So we have done a lot of targeting directly to the attributed members because it's really your opportunity.
That's really interesting. That makes sense that you'd advertise to those who are getting most of their care there.
Yeah. And I would tell you the other people, and it's really interesting because we thought we would get a lot of new employees, but we thought it would be single people. They don't care about the physicians. They don't care about anything.
Yeah.
And what's beautiful, we have a lot of families enrolled. And actually, the majority of new hires do pick this product offering. And I think it's because either one, are they new to the area? And we've been assessing that as well. Like, are they new just
Right.
in? And then we price it, lower than the other offerings. And we did that on purpose, after doing design thinking and some things like that. But yeah, you'll find that a lot of new hires will actually select it and stay with it.
Now, it's been a few years in. I am so curious to know, what did the other systems do? How did they react? Did they get sour grapes, or did they come in and were more proactive about working with you? I'm so curious about how the rest of the market responded.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I would say the system that we thought would be the one that would end up with the contract, and it's just not in their DNA, right? Very disappointed. And I would tell you, very fearful that, the business was going to leave them. Now, what's interesting, they all came back and said, I want to do a direct contract with GM. Because we even thought, does it make sense to do a second one? Now, again, and we're very open to talking to them, but when you come back and you want to do a direct contract with GM, we're going to push a contract over to you that says, this is what you must meet. Here's the criteria. And when you do that, they're not ready, and they're not. So it's, I'm like, when you get ready, let us know. But they definitely are not ready yet. Yeah. And if you think about, like, in the Detroit market, especially, even recently with Spectrum merging with Beaumont and then Beaumont becoming Corewell, there's been a lot of change in the system in the marketplace up there. But I think I think that change drives opportunity. Yeah.
Change drives opportunity. That's a terrific place, I think, to wrap up for today. Thank you so much for sharing this. There's so many good points that we got today. For those of you listening, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, please feel free to share it or send it to any of your friends or colleagues so they can enjoy it as well. And Sheila, if anyone is looking to get in touch with you or would like to pick your brain a little bit, what's the best way to reach out?
I always say, send me an email or even an invite on LinkedIn. I am so happy to connect with people and really just help educate, employers on what does it take and why do you want to go down this road? Yeah.
Appreciate your giving heart. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening today. I'm your host, Lee Lewis, and this is another episode of Broken Benefits. Thanks for joining us on Broken Benefits. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, please share today's show with a friend or colleague. It's free to do, and it helps us spread the message to as many people as possible.